Hello everyone, welcome back again to Angela's Craft Room. Today I've wanted to show you how I do my watercolouring. I've had quite a few requests to show you how I do my watercolouring, and I've actually changed how I do it. So I thought it was a good time using one of the new stamp sets, Postcard Pals, which is one of my favourites. I love these little critters, they're just awesome. This is the pelican, and then we have a platypus, and we have a beaver. So I love all three of them, and I have been colouring them a lot with my stamping blends because it is my all-time favourite way to colour. But by using your re-inkers and an aqua brush from Stampin' Up like this that you fill with water, by using that and your ink refills, you just have so many colour choices. So I thought I'd show you how I do it and how it's just so easy. So first off, we're going to stamp and just quickly do a little bit of colouring. I'm not going to fully colour the image because I'll explain as I go why I'm not going to do that. So I'm just bringing in my Stamparatus, and I'm just placing the tip for those that don't normally watch me. This is, I always pop a stamp set underneath, because when you're stamping onto your stamp, like so, it gives you some leverage and you're not bending that lid back. So that's just a little tip for you. So I just stamp him up, and this part of the process I have to move quite quickly. So if I go quiet, it's just because I have to do it quickly. So it's very important at this point that this ink has to remain wet. So I like to stamp it up a couple of times. Just open this jar because I'm going to be embossing him first before we colour him, and I'll explain why later. But so I will have the heat gun going, so I won't talk while I have the heat gun going, just to set the embossing powder. Now you can use any ink doing this technique. You can use your Night of Navy or your Rich Raspberry, whatever you want. But I'm just using Memento. And I do like to stamp the image twice, just so that I'm sure that it's going to be wet once I take it off quickly. And I bring over a piece of normal photocopy paper folded in half, and I'm just going to liberally smother him in clear embossing powder. So you notice I haven't used Versamark ink. And then I'm going to just heat emboss him, heat set. Just takes a little while to heat up. There we go, it's starting to melt. So you can see that he did change colour. I'll just check under bit of light. And he's pretty dry. So I'm just going to, so I don't spill this embossing powder everywhere, I'm just going to tip that back into the jar. And that paper can go straight in the bin so I don't get embossing powder everywhere. So that's the first part of my technique, how I do my watercolouring. So, and also one thing which I didn't do, I should have, before I stamped, I should have just rubbed it with my embossing buddy, but I didn't this time, so sorry about that. So now what I do is I've just got a cheap palette from just a cheap store, and I use my ink refills to do my watercolouring. Now this is an aqua painter for those that don't know, and you can see I've already filled it with water. You just unscrew it here and fill it under the tap with water. And when you first use it, you just need to squeeze about up here, just squeeze it so the water is coming out. Okay, so I've purposely swished my ink around and dabbed it here so I know that that is my Calypso Coral, that is my Granny Apple Green, and that is my Crushed Curry. Now I left one off because I just wanted to show you how little that you need in there in your palette. You hardly need anything. So I try very hard only to put one drop. That's pretty good. Sometimes it just more comes out, and that's just some crumb cake. And then when I first put it in there, what I do is I just swish it round, because then I can see what colour that is. And then I'll just move this guy out the way for a minute. Then I just dab my ink, my aqua painter, so it's clean again. So I know that's the 4 colours that I'm going to use today. Okay, so you'll see me dabbing up there quite a bit, most probably. So we bring this guy in. Now why we emboss it with the embossing powder first is because that creates walls within your image. So hopefully you won't go outside the lines. So we're going to start with his jacket, and I'm using the Calypso Coral, and it just depends where you want to start. There's no wrong or right place to start, but I like to go down my edge, and I'm only hardly touching that, just with the very point of my aqua painter. And you can see how easily that comes on. Now this is quite a narrow space up here, so you just need to take a little bit of care. So while I don't want to re-ink it up until I've got a full coverage, and so I'm just going under his arms. I'll just do down this spot here, and you can see how easy that is to colour, because you're not having to worry about going out of the lines, because you're not going to go, I'll just go in a little bit more. You're not going to go over the lines, hopefully, because as long as you don't have too much water, it's going to stop at that wall where we've embossed it. Okay. So when I watercolour, at the beginning I said I won't be doing the full thing because it would just take too long on the video. But what I find is I like to put one coat of everything, on my image. So I'm doing his coat first, and then what I would do is I would set it aside and let that first coat dry, which normally wouldn't take much more than about 15 or 20 minutes. And then I would go back in. You mightn't even have to go back in, but if you want to go back in, once the first coat needs to be fully dry before you start adding any more colour. Like in a second coat. Because if I was to keep adding ink now, it would just keep going into a muddy mess. So that's all I'm going to do on his little jacket there. Now we'll attempt to do the tie, which I think I'm going to do in, what colour? I think I'll do that in crushed curry. So that's my third one. So I'm going to start in the middle because that's the biggest space I've got to colour, because there is quite a thin piece around his throat, which I want to be very careful. But you can see by using your re-inkers and your aqua painter brush, if you've got all the refills, you have just got so many colours that you can use. My favourite colouring tool with Stampin' Up are the Stampin' Up blends, which my subscribers know I use them all the time. But for tutorials, this is the way to go because it's just so easy. So we'll just squeeze the rest of that yellow out, and then we'll just go into one of the new colours, Granny Apple Green, and we're just going to do his hat. So I'm going to go do this front part of his hat first. And another thing I like to do is when I have fully coloured him, and usually I don't do more than 2 coats, once that second coat's dry, then I get my Winker Stella clear and I just put it into the highlight areas wherever I want. And with these images, the artist has done all the hard work for you, because where I would put my highlight is where the dark lines are, even on his body or anything like that. Now, I'm not a way out colourer, whereas I've seen a lot of people colour these like in way out colours like purple, and their bodies, I mean. So, I mean, that's up to you. I wish I could do that, but it's just not, I just don't feel happy with my product at the end. So I'm just going to go into crumb cake, and I like to start the crumb cake, I like to start with his body, and because he's got like a big round belly, I'm going like trying to do a continuous stroke as far as I can, and I'm still only using the tip, but I'm like doing a curve. So when it dries, it'll be a nice seamless finish. So I'll just go back in there a bit. But especially if you're not confident in colouring, this is the way to go, because it is just so easy. And by doing that little embossing trick at the beginning, it's just going to help you so much. So I'm just still going round. Even though this is the bottom of him, it's still quite round at the bottom. And this is only the first coat that I would do, so we'll just do his tail. And I don't worry, like, if different parts of his body, as in his skin and his tail and his little feet, I don't worry if I'm using, say in this instance I'm using crumb cake, I don't worry if it's different tones of crumb cake on his body, because that just adds more interest. So like here, I'm just doing the feet a little lighter. But I would suggest that you just, if you're going to try this technique, that you do it lightly first for your first coat, and you can always go back and add colour, but you can't take it out. So I'm just doing his little hands, and you can see how quick and easy this colouring is. If I was teaching someone colouring, I would encourage them to get their re-inkers and one of these aqua brushes. And this is just stamped on normal Whisper White, the thick cardstock, Whisper White thick from Stamping Up. Oh, sorry, it's not. I'm thinking of the inside of my card. This is actually stamped on watercolour paper, but I don't use, I'll be honest, I don't use the Stamping Up watercolour paper. I actually use Bristol, and it's quite a smooth watercolour paper. So it took me a while to work out what I was happy to use, but that's what I use, and it is called Smooth. It's Bristol Smooth, and it's quite thick. It's about a 270 GSM. But I used to use Stamping Up watercolour paper, and that's perfectly fine product to use. But if you're going to do this technique and you're going to use Stamping Up watercolour paper, just make sure that you use the smooth side. So I'm just doing his bill and just being very careful. So I'm just about running out of crumb cake, but I do like to do the face lighter if I can manage to do it. Sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't. So he's got little mouth there, so I'm not going to go in there. And as you can see, I'm not colouring this into his eyes, because I would colour them blue or green or whatever you coloured eyes you want. So I would put another coat of, well, I would add a bit more colour here, definitely. That's too light. It's all right to have the face a bit lighter, but to me that's But that's about all I'd do, and then I'd let it dry for a good 20 minutes before I start putting my finishing touches on it. And as long as you're happy with it, that's all that matters. So that's that technique. I'll just grab a bit of Coastal Cabana, and I'm just going to try and just put a real little bit of there, drop there. And just dabbing it on my paper towel. And this paper towel, you need that to be a little bit damp before you start. And you only want a real little bit of, maybe not that little, bit more. To do his eyes. They may be a little bit too blue, but that's okay. And then I'm just going to grab just a real little bit of Calypso Coral and just do his mouth ever so carefully in there like that. So I'll get that Coastal Cabana off because I noticed I just missed part of his body in there. So that's all there is to it, and that's the technique of how I use my watercolouring paper, my watercolouring technique I should say. So I'm really happy how they do turn out, and I think it's just the easiest way to watercolour because you're not going outside your lines and it's just so easy. So I'm going to set him aside to dry, and we're going to put the card together because I've pre-coloured one. So I'm using, my base colour is Calypso Coral, and that is 11 inches long by 4 1/8 of an inch wide, and then I've scored that at 5.5 inches. And then I've taken a piece of Whisper White which measures 5 1/4 inches by 3 7/8 of an inch, and I had one of the little guys stamped and cut out just on normal Whisper White, and I've popped him in there. If I was doing this for someone and not just a video, if I was doing that for someone, I would have coloured that in with my blends first, and then I would have glued him in there. So those that don't watch my videos normally, I just really like to have something inside my card rather than just a blank piece of paper. And then I've taken a piece of Granny Apple Green and I've embossed that with the embossing folder Garden Trellis, and that piece measures 3 7/8 of an inch by 5 1/4 inches, and we're just going to glue that straight on, I think, just thinking. And so when you're gluing an embossed piece of cardstock, for those that don't know, because you've got that embossed, you can hear my glue running over that. It's really important to try and get your glue into a little bit of those crevices so that it will adhere to your card. Okay. So just make sure I've got my card up the right way. Now I'm just going to eyeball this and attempt to get it centered. And another good thing with the Tombow liquid glue, it does give you those few seconds. If you don't get your piece of cardstock down as straight as you may like, it does give you those few seconds to move it. And one thing that I also do is if any glue just comes out, I just get a cotton bud. I always have them on my craft desk, and I just rub that along there, and that fixes that problem right up. Now, I took a piece of, this is from Graceful Glass Vellum DSP, and it is one of the current ones, the new ones that Stamping Up brought out in 2018 at the beginning of June. So to adhere that to my card, what I would use is tear and tape. So let's see what side. So what I'm going to do is just, I'm going to put a piece of tear and tape at the top and one at the bottom. Grab my scissors. And then another piece at the bottom. Now, the thing with using tear and tape, it is a very strong adhesive, and if you're not used to it, just be careful when you're putting it on this piece onto your card, because once tear and tape goes down, you can't lift it back up. So you just have to be mindful of it and just think about where you want to have your card, it to be adhered to your card, whereabouts you want it. So I'm just having a look there, and then we just peel off the backing of the tear and tape. Now, this piece of DSP, if I didn't mention, because I know a lot of you like me to tell you the measurements, this one is the same width, so it's 3 7/8 of an inch wide, and then I've just made it about 2 3/4 of an inch in height. But that's just my measurements. That's just for those that like me to give them their measurements. And I just accidentally dropped that down there. Can you believe that? So I'm just going to go with it. Luckily, it's just about where I wanted it. So it just breaks up that granny apple green, because granny apple green is so bright and out there in your face, but it's a beautiful colour when it goes with colours that suits it. So then I'll just set that aside for a minute. Then this is my pre-coloured platypus, and I've just cut him out with the layering framelits, and then I've cut another square out with the layering square framelits that's just slightly bigger. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some dimensionals, which I forgot to grab out the drawer. I do apologise for that. So I'm just going to put one dimensional in each corner. And I might even pop one in the middle because I'm going to press down on it. So as simple as that. So then we're just going to try and centre it. Like that. Bring back our card base that we're working on, and I'm just going to pop him about there. So I'm going to be brave, and I'm going to pop some tear and tape on two sides of him. You could pop him up again on dimensionals if you really wanted him to bounce off the page. but I do want to add dimensionals to my sentiment as well. So I thought I would just pop him down on some tear and tape because he's got this piece of cardstock is going onto that graceful glass vellum, and sometimes the glue just doesn't like vellum, so you best to use this. Now I'm going to attempt to center that the best I can. Down like that, and I'm quite happy with that. And then, so I'll just show you, that's the new Postcard Pals stamp set, and you can see the 3 images, and they're just beautiful images to be colouring, they really are. And with my sentiment is from the Good Day stamp set, so just so you know. So my sentiment is I stamped it on some Whisper White, and I just used my blends just to colour the leaves in, and I cut that out with a 1 3/8 of an inch scallop punch, and then I cut using a 1 1/2 inch circle punch. I just cut a piece of Blackberry Bliss out, which I'm going to pop that up on dimensionals again. And pop that onto the Blackberry Bliss. Like that. And then see how that, because I've popped that up on dimensionals, that's got that little gap in there, and that will actually slide into the corner of the layering squares. So, but it won't if you put if you were to put dimensionals on this, it wouldn't slip in like that. So I'm just going to put a little, well, not a little bit, but some Tombow glue. And our card is just about finished. And I'm just going to slide that in. And I'm not worried that the glue's going on the vellum because it's also going on the cardstock, so it's going to sit there very nicely for me. So I hope that helps those that have been asking me about watercolouring images, and I may do another one, seeing I'm on a roll with this at the moment. But I hope you like that technique, and I hope you've enjoyed that video. And if you're not a subscriber to my channel, I'd really appreciate you subscribing. So this one here was the first one I did with the pelican, and this is the one I've done with the beaver. So it's just different. I've put a bit of foil, specialty paper foil underneath here, and that's mint macaron, and that's rich raspberry, and with a bit of gold foil and Whisper White, of course. So, and this one was the Granny Apple Green, Blackberry Bliss, and Calypso Coral, because I know a lot of you like to know the colour combos. So I hope you enjoyed that video today. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.